He sold my lake house while I was still paying the taxes on it. The same house where he learned to swim, where his mother planted the birch tree after our first winter there. The message came on a Sunday morning. No greeting, no hesitation, just a line that split something open inside me. "We're going tomorrow, Dad. I've sold your lake house." I sat at the kitchen table, coffee going cold, scrolling through the documents attached to his text, a signed offer, my name forged in blue digital ink, closing date in 3 days. He must have thought I was too old to check the emails, too sentimental to keep the paperwork. But he didn't know the house was never just in my name. It was held under a trust, and every trust leaves a trail. I didn't call him back. I just stared at the phone, then at the framed photo on the wall, him at 17 standing by the dock with that same careless grin he used when he thought the world owed him something. That lake house wasn't just timber and glass. It was collateral for years of work I didn't talk about. Deals that bought me my second life after the factory closed. I'd rebuilt the place board by board after the storm of 2004, refinanced it twice to pay his college tuition when he changed majors 3 times. And now my own son had listed it behind my back, using a power of attorney I'd signed for medical reasons last winter, when I thought he'd just help with bills while I recovered from surgery. I remember the pen trembling in my hand that day, his words calm. "It's just temporary, Dad, I'll take care of things." He did take care of them, right into his wife's account. I opened the county records site, typed the parcel number by memory. The sale was pending, but the wire hadn't cleared. There was still time, 48 hours, maybe less, before escrow finalized. I printed every page, every signature, highlighted the mismatched date formats and the wrong initials he hadn't noticed. Then I called the attorney who handled the trust 15 years ago, Harold Klein, semi-retired, still answering his own phone. He listened without interrupting. "You kept the trust alive?" he asked. I told him yes. "Good. Then the sale can't close without your counter-signature. Let's freeze it." The next morning I was at the bank by 8 a.m. sharp, requesting the full transaction log on the property. The clerk hesitated until I handed her the trust certificate. 2 screens later she looked up, pale. "Sir, the buyer's funds haven't cleared yet. They're waiting for verification." Perfect. I left without another word, drove straight to the lake with 3 hours upstate. The water was glass still, the dock half rotted, leaves stuck to the steps like forgotten promises. My truck's tires crackled over gravel that hadn't been driven on in months. And then I saw it. A sold sign hammered crooked into the ground, and the kind of cheap red plastic you buy at Home Depot. He'd even taken a photo for the listing. My porch furniture. The canoe. The fire pit still blackened from our last summer cookout. For a moment I felt the anger twist into something colder. I walked around the house, unlocked the door and stood inside the silence. Every board creaked like it remembered me. The framed fishing license still hung by the fireplace. His initials were carved in the banister from when he was 10. And yet, this was the place he'd traded for a down payment on a city condo. I took pictures, time-stamped, geotagged, proof the property was still under my possession. I knew he'd arrive soon, thinking he was here to hand off the keys to the new owner. I waited. When the sound of a familiar car engine echoed down the hill, I didn't move. Let him come. Let him walk into the mess he'd made, thinking I wouldn't notice the smell of ink and fraud. He parked crooked, stepped out in a designer jacket, sunglasses. That fake confidence people wear when they've already crossed the line and hope no one's watching. He saw me on the porch and froze. "Dad, you're here?" he stammered. "You sold my house," I said evenly. He laughed, tried to keep his voice light. "Our house, technically. You said someday it'd be mine." "Someday isn't today," I replied. "And definitely not with forged documents." His smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "You'll find out in court," I said, pulling the printed pages from my folder. "Forgery carries up to 10 years, even for family." His face went pale, and for the first time in years he looked like the boy I used to protect. But this time I wasn't saving him. I was saving myself. He started pacing, his hands twitching like he was searching for a way out that didn't exist. "Dad, please, don't make this into something huge. It's still in the family. I just needed liquidity for a few months. We're investing, me and Claire. We found a property downtown, guaranteed returns." His voice cracked on the word guaranteed, the way it used to when he lied about grades in high school. I didn't answer. I let him fill the silence with excuses until he ran out of breath. The only sounds left were the soft waves slapping the dock and the faint whistle of wind through the broken screen door. "You used my signature," I said finally. "You pulled it from last winter's medical form. You think I wouldn't notice the timestamp metadata?" He blinked, lost. He'd forgotten the metadata strips on PDFs record every edit. He'd deleted his trail on his laptop but forgot Cloud Sync. I had it all. He tried to step closer, to play the old card. Proximity, guilt, the son's authority that comes from years of a father saying yes. But this time I stayed still. "You think you're the first one to try to take something from me on paper," I said. "I built my career drafting those contracts before you were born." He swallowed. The confidence drained out of him, replaced by something closer to panic. I could see the equation running in his head. Assets, timeline, law. Then his phone buzzed. He looked down. "It's the agent," he muttered. "They're on their way." I turned and walked back inside, sat at the table and waited. 10 minutes later, a white SUV rolled up, logo on the side, clipboard in hand. A woman stepped out, businesslike, smile rehearsed. "Mr. Reynolds?" she asked, looking at my son. I lifted a hand. That would be me. Legally, at least, until a court says otherwise. Her smile froze. "I'm sorry, I was told—" "You were told by someone without ownership rights," I interrupted. "Would you like to see the trust deed?" She hesitated, then nodded. I slid the file across the table. She scanned the top line. Reynolds Family Trust, revocable by sole surviving member, David Reynolds. Her shoulders tensed. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said carefully. My son's voice rose. "No, it's done. You said the buyer wired funds." She shook her head, pulling back her phone. "They were waiting on verification from the title office. Without both trustees' signatures, it's void." The color drained from his face. "Dad, please, you can't—" "I can," I said quietly. "And I already did. Harold filed the injunction at 9:03 this morning." The agent excused herself quickly, muttering something about legal exposure, and drove off. The crunch of gravel under her tires faded, leaving only the wind again. My son stood there, deflated, his words tangled. "I thought you didn't care about the house," he whispered. I looked at him. "I cared enough to build it with my own hands. You cared enough to sell it without asking." He rubbed his temples, pacing again. "Claire's pregnant," he blurted, as if that justified everything. I said nothing. "We needed money." "You've got assets. You don't even use this place." "It's just sitting here." I leaned forward. "Everything you just said is exactly why I wrote the trust. To protect it. From you, from anyone who thinks sentiment equals weakness." He went silent. His eyes darted to the window, to the lake, like maybe he could still find a way to fix it. I didn't tell him that it was already over. The county would log the injunction by evening. The bank would flag the forged POA. And by Monday morning, the sales escrow would be reversed, his accounts frozen pending fraud review. The buyer would pull out, the agent would report, and the district attorney's office would quietly open a file. I stood, walked past him, and stepped out onto the porch. The lake shimmered gold under the lowering sun. I could almost hear his mother's laughter from the years before it all cracked. "Dad, please," he said behind me. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "But it did," I replied. "You chose the shortcut, son. Now it's a straight line to consequences." He flinched. I didn't shout, didn't curse, just turned the lock on the door. The same way I had when he left for college. A hit clicked softly, final. As I drove away, my rearview mirror caught the shape of him standing there, too proud to chase after the truck but too lost to move. By the time I reached the main road, Harold had already texted me. "Injunction confirmed. Buyer withdrawing. You're protected." I set the phone down and exhaled. It wasn't relief. It was something heavier, the weight of understanding that sometimes protecting what's yours means losing what you thought family was. 2 days later, I woke before sunrise and checked my inbox. 43 unread messages. Escrow, bank fraud department, county recorder. Each one a thread in the web he had tried to spin around me. I opened the first. Confirmation that the wire had been frozen mid-transfer. $426,000 held pending investigation. The buyer's attorney had attached a note. Our client has been misled regarding ownership status. We request all communications be forwarded to our office. That was legal language for we're out. I scrolled through attachments, doctored PDFs, timestamps 2:17 a.m., metadata linking back to his Gmail. It wasn't just clumsy, it was arrogant. He had used my old laptop, the one still registered under my name. I took a sip of cold coffee and hit print. 122 pages later, the living room table looked like a war map. Receipts, trust documents, loan statements, the deed to the property I'd nearly lost to my own blood. At 9:15 a.m., the phone rang. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Detective Vasquez with County Financial Crimes. We've received a referral from the district attorney regarding a forged real estate transaction. Are you available to come in?" I answered yes. He said, "Bring everything. We already have partial evidence from the bank, but it'll go smoother with your originals." By noon, I was sitting under flickering fluorescent lights, across from a detective who looked too young to remember when contracts were still signed with pens. I told him the story straight, no emotion, just dates and numbers. He listened, occasionally typing. When I finished, he said quietly, "You understand this could go to felony charges, forgery of power of attorney, wire fraud, identity theft. Each carries separate penalties." I nodded. "I'm not looking for revenge," I said. "Just boundaries." He almost smiled. "Boundaries enforced by law. That's the best kind." He copied the documents, took photographs, and asked me to sign a statement. When I left the station, the sun had dropped behind grey clouds, that kind of dim afternoon light that makes the world feel temporary. My phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. "Dad, please answer." "I didn't mean to." "I'll fix it." Another text followed. "They're saying I could get arrested." Claire's freaking out. I stared at the screen for a long time, then slid the phone face down on the passenger seat. The drive back to the lake took 3 hours and 12 minutes. I remember the exact number, because every mile felt like counting down to something final. The air smelled of rain and iron. When I arrived, a sheriff's cruiser was parked halfway down the drive. The deputy approached, polite but guarded. "Mr. Reynolds?" I nodded. "We served a warrant for electronic devices related to the property sale. Your son turned them over voluntarily." He hesitated. "He asked me to tell you he's sorry." I thanked him, waited for the car to leave, then stood alone on the porch again. Inside, the house felt different, emptier, cleaner somehow. Maybe it was just me seeing it without the weight of deceit. I walked room to room, turned on the old lamp, sat by the window where the lake reflected the last of the daylight. That night I didn't sleep. I read through the old letters his mother had written years ago before she passed, notes about keeping the house for family, about teaching him respect for work, about legacy. She'd written, "If he forgets what this place means, remind him." I wondered if that's what this was, her way of forcing the reminder through me. Around midnight, headlights swept across the wall. A car door shut, footsteps crunched gravel. I didn't move. A knock. Then his voice, small, hoarse. "Dad, please." I opened the door. He stood there in the rain, soaked, holding a folder. "They said I should come to you," he whispered. "They're talking about felony charges. They said if you sign a statement of forgiveness, they might reduce it." I looked at the folder. Plea documents, lawyer's notes, his eyes red. He'd aged 10 years in 3 days. "Come in," I said. He stepped inside, dripping water on the floorboards. I poured him coffee, black. Neither of us spoke for a full minute. Then I asked, "Did you ever think what this would do? Not to the property, to trust." His lip trembled. "I thought I could fix it before you found out. I thought you'd forgive me if it helped us start something new." "Forgive?" I repeated. "You took the one place that still had her in it. You didn't even ask." He stared down at his hands. "I know." I waited until he met my eyes. "You'll cooperate fully," I said. "You'll return every cent you withdrew. You'll sign over your access to the trust. In return, I'll ask they keep this off your record." He nodded instantly, desperate. "I will anything." I slid a pen across the table. "Then write it now." He signed everything. Revocation of power, affidavit of wrongdoing, consent to restitution. Each stroke of ink sounded like a chapter closing. When he finished, I folded the pages, sealed them in an envelope, and handed him a towel. "You can stay the night," I said. "Guest room's still yours." He looked shocked, almost childlike. "You're not throwing me out?" "You're already out," I said quietly. "But I'm not cruel." He went upstairs without another word. I sat there until the rain stopped, listening to the ticking clock. Around 3 a.m., I heard the creak of the staircase, his quiet footsteps, the front door opening then closing. I didn't follow. I knew he wouldn't come back again, at least not as the same person. The next morning, the sheriff called to confirm he'd reported to his attorney and turned over full cooperation paperwork. The charges would likely be reduced to probation and restitution. Justice, quiet and clean. I drove to the county office one last time and signed the renewal of the trust, adding one final clause: no descendant shall hold or transfer ownership without unanimous trustee consent. I listed myself and one other name, my granddaughter, Lily, born last year. She'd never met me yet, but maybe someday she'd understand why the old house by the lake still stood untouched, carrying the silence of lessons learned too late. I locked the door behind me, placed the keys in the safe, and wrote a note on the kitchen counter: "If you ever come back, bring honesty." Then I stepped outside, into the morning light that cut through mist like a clean page ready to be written on again. The air was sharp, the kind that makes you aware of every breath, every sound. The lake was smooth as glass, mirroring a sky too pale to hold any storms. I stood there, feeling the cold wood of the porch under my palms, and realized I wasn't angry anymore. What was left wasn't rage. It was a kind of stillness, the quiet that comes when you finally stop fighting the wrong battle. My phone buzzed again, another text from him. "They offered probation if I testify." "I'll do it." "I'm sorry." I didn't reply. Some apologies are just acknowledgements that the damage is permanent. I drove into town that afternoon, stopped by Harold's office one last time. The old man was waiting with a folder thicker than before. "Everything's settled," he said. "Title restored, sale voided, trust reinforced. I added a standing clause that requires a dual signature with your granddaughter once she comes of age. That'll keep this place safe for another generation." He paused, looking over his glasses. "You did the right thing, David, not just legally, morally." I gave him a small nod. "Right and easy rarely walk together," I said. He chuckled softly. "You sound like me 20 years ago." On the way back, I took the long route through the Ridge Road. The leaves were turning already, patches of gold and crimson breaking through the green. Every turn of the road felt like another page closing. I stopped at a diner halfway home, the same one I used to take him to after fishing trips when he was a boy, the same cracked leather booths, the same smell of burnt coffee and syrup. The waitress recognized me immediately. "Haven't seen you in a while, Mr. Reynolds," she said. "Your usual." I smiled faintly. "Yeah, why not?" When she set the plate down, I caught sight of something on the counter, an old photo board the owner kept of local families. There, pinned under a thumbtack, was a faded picture of me and him, maybe age 10, holding up a trout half his size. I stared at it for a long time. People think grief only comes from death, but sometimes it's just the slow understanding that what you built for love got repurposed for greed. After lunch, I went by the sheriff's office to sign a final statement for restitution. Vasquez met me at the door. "He's cooperating," he said. "He's turning over the remaining funds and assisting with evidence recovery. The DA's office wants to close it quietly." I nodded. "Good." He hesitated before adding, "You handled this better than most. Usually these things end ugly. Family torn apart, lawsuits, years of bitterness." "It's still torn apart," I said, "but I can live with clean edges." He gave a small nod. "If you ever need anything, call me." That evening, I returned to the lake house with a truck full of tools and sealant. Not to sell, not to renovate, just to fix what time had undone. I spent hours on the dock, tightening bolts, replacing boards, patching the places where rot had crept in unnoticed. The rhythm was grounding: scrape, sand, hammer, breathe. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, my hands were sore, my shirt soaked, but the dock stood solid again. I sat at the edge, legs hanging above the dark water, and watched the ripples spread from where a single leaf had fallen. As the light faded, I thought about what I'd tell Lily someday, when she was old enough to ask about the house. I'd tell her that it's not about walls or roofs or property lines. It's about the weight of promises. I'd tell her that blood doesn't always mean trust, and trust doesn't always mean forgiveness. And I'd tell her that her father once sold what wasn't his, and in doing so taught me what was still mine: peace, discipline, boundaries. The following week, a certified letter arrived. It was from his attorney, a formal statement acknowledging restitution and my signature confirming receipt. Inside the envelope was also a personal note, handwritten. Dad, I know I've burned the bridge. I'm not asking to rebuild it, but I hope someday you'll stand on the other side and wave. I folded it once and placed it in the same drawer as his mother's letters. Some wounds don't heal, but they stop bleeding. Months passed. The lake froze over, spring thawed it again, and the world went on turning. The house stood quiet but alive, new paint, repaired shingles, and silence that felt earned. On the first warm morning of April, I brewed coffee, stepped onto the porch, and looked across the water. There was a new family moving into a cabin across the cove, kids running, laughter echoing faintly. For a moment I felt something I hadn't in years, relief, not regret. I walked down to the dock, took a photo, and sent it to Harold with a short message. Still standing. He replied minutes later, "Good. So are you." I smiled. That was enough. In the end, there were no courtrooms, no shouting matches, no dramatic reconciliations, just quiet accountability. The kind that sticks. The kind that doesn't need witnesses. I closed my eyes, listened to the water lapping against the pier, and whispered the words I'd been waiting to say for months. It's done. And it was. Weeks blurred into months, and the house settled into its new rhythm. Quiet mornings, slow coffee, the hum of cicadas replacing the noise of confrontation. I'd stopped checking my phone as much. The world outside that property line had shrunk to something I could finally manage. Weather reports, lumber invoices, the occasional text from Harold reminding me to update the insurance. Every few days I'd drive into town for groceries and hardware. People still whispered, but not with judgment anymore, more like curiosity, the kind that comes when someone does what others are too afraid to do, draw a line and keep it. Then, late one Saturday afternoon, as the sky started its slow descent into amber, I saw an unfamiliar car parked by the gate. A small silver sedan, clean, cautious. I walked closer, and a young woman stepped out, maybe 25, holding a folder to her chest. "Mr. Reynolds," she asked. "I'm Lily." For a second, I didn't process it. Then it hit me like a tide pulling in. My granddaughter. I hadn't seen her since she was a toddler at her mother's funeral. I nodded, voice caught in my throat. "You look like her," I said finally. She smiled gently. "Everyone says that." "She'd driven 3 hours to see me," she said. Her father didn't know she was here. She'd found my address in the trust paperwork after turning 18 and had been meaning to come for years. "I wanted to see the place," she said softly. "Dad always said it ruined everything." I raised an eyebrow. "He said that, huh?" She nodded. "But I don't think that's true. I think people ruin themselves and then blame the nearest thing that stands still." That line, sharp, honest, was her grandmother all over again. I gestured toward the porch. "You want to see it?" We walked the perimeter of the property, her asking questions about the trees, the dock, the old storm marks carved into the siding. Every answer seemed to tighten some invisible thread between past and present. Inside, she looked at the photos on the mantel. Me, her father as a boy, her grandmother smiling with that same tilt of the head Lily had. "You kept all of these," she whispered. "I kept what mattered," I said. We sat by the fire that night, the crackling wood breaking the silence. She told me about college, environmental law of all things, and about how she wanted to work on property rights and preservation. "I guess it's in the blood," she said with a small laugh. "I just want to make sure people don't lose what's theirs." I didn't say it out loud, but I thought, then maybe all this wasn't for nothing. Later, as she was leaving, she handed me a sealed envelope. "Dad asked me to give you this," she said quietly. "He doesn't know I came, but he wanted you to have it if I ever did." I didn't open it until long after she drove away, taillights fading into the dusk. Inside was a cashier's check, $426,000, the exact amount of the attempted sale. No note, no signature beyond the bank's, just a repayment in full. I sat at the table for a long time, the weight of that check heavier than any apology could have been. It didn't erase what he'd done, but it acknowledged it, cleanly, like a ledger closing after years of imbalance. The next morning I took the check into town. The teller recognized my name instantly. "We can deposit this directly into the trust," she said. I nodded. "That's where it belongs." When she asked for a purpose note, I paused, then wrote, "Restoration." Life evened out after that. Seasons shifted without drama. The local paper ran another small piece 6 months later. Family Trust preserves lake property through legal reforms. They called it a model for intergenerational integrity. I didn't care much for the phrasing, but the message was right. Boundaries aren't fences, they're instructions for love. One night in early summer, I sat out on the dock again, the sky painted in deep blue streaks. Across the cove, the new family had strung up lanterns, kids laughing as they jumped into the water. Somewhere faintly, I heard an old radio playing a song my wife used to hum while painting the porch. It made the air feel alive again. I thought about how everything had come full circle, the betrayal, the law, the quiet redemption. I wasn't proud of the pain that got us here, but I was proud of the order that followed. A month later, Lily returned with papers for me to sign, her addition as co-trustee now finalized. She'd grown into herself in a way that made the years I'd lost feel less cruel. As we signed the documents, she looked up and said, "Do you think he'll ever come back here?" I shrugged. "Maybe. The door's not locked, but it's not open either." She smiled. "Fair enough." When she left that day, I stood at the window watching her car wind down the road, dust rising behind her like memory dissolving into light. The house was silent again, but it wasn't empty. It had purpose now. That evening I took one final walk to the edge of the property, where the birch tree still grew, taller than the roofline now. I placed my hand on the bark and whispered, "It's safe." The leaves rustled as if answering back. I looked up at the stars bleeding through the twilight and thought of her, the woman who'd built this life with me, the son who nearly broke it, the granddaughter who might keep it alive. I exhaled slowly, realizing that revenge had never been about punishment. It was about preservation, about making sure the truth outlasts the people who tried to bury it. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and sat by the fireplace as embers glowed faintly. The smell of cedar filled the room, and for the first time in years, I felt at home again. The following autumn brought a different kind of quiet, one that didn't ache anymore. The town had moved on to new stories, new scandals. The trust paperwork sat neatly filed in a metal box, and for the first time in years, I didn't dread mail from the county or calls from unknown numbers. The lake house had turned from battlefield to refuge again. I'd even started renting it to traveling teachers and off-season hikers. Nothing fancy, just people who understood silence. Every few weeks I drove up to check the place, mend a step, clear the gutters, stack wood. The repetition was its own therapy. One Sunday I found a letter wedged under the porch mat. No envelope, just folded paper. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "Dad, I'm staying sober. Community service ends next month. I'm working construction again. Real work. I won't come by unless you say so." There was a phone number at the bottom. I sat on the steps for a long time with that letter in my hand, tracing the dents of each word with my thumb. I didn't call. Not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to fix. Some distances need to stay measured for both sides to heal. I tucked the note into the same drawer as the check, closed it softly, and went back to sanding the railing. Winter crept in early. By December, the lake froze thick enough to walk on, and the world outside felt like a held breath. I spent Christmas alone but not lonely, roast in the oven, a small tree by the window, the radio playing low. Around midnight, the phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. A picture appeared, a newborn wrapped in a white blanket. "Dad, meet Ethan, your grandson." Beneath it, "I understand if you don't reply, but I wanted you to know." I stared at that picture until the screen dimmed. He looked peaceful, untouched by all the history that had hardened the rest of us. I whispered, "Welcome to the world, kid," and set the phone down. That was enough of a reply. Spring came with rain and thaw and the faint pull of something lighter. Lily called more often now, asking about foundation repairs, insurance updates. how to handle tenants. We talked like partners, not strangers bound by blood. She sent me photos of her first big case win, defending a family who'd nearly lost their land to a shady developer. "I thought of you the whole time," she said. "I used your line. Right and easy rarely walk together." The judge even quoted it in his decision. I laughed for the first time in months. Guess I'm published now. By summer, the house was booked through September. One couple from Ohio wrote me a thank you note after their stay. "We felt peace here we haven't felt in years." That line sat with me. Maybe peace wasn't something you chase. Maybe it's what fills the space left when you stop chasing anything. One evening in late July, I heard footsteps on the gravel while closing up the boathouse. I turned, and there he was. Older, thinner, wearing a flannel shirt and carrying nothing but a duffel. He stopped 10 feet away. "Can I talk to you?" he asked. His voice wasn't defiant anymore. It was quiet, stripped bare. I nodded toward the porch. He sat on the steps, eyes on the water. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said. "I just wanted you to see I'm trying." I watched him for a while before answering. "You're standing." "That's a start," he nodded. Claire left. She couldn't handle the fallout. I don't blame her. I'm renting a room above the hardware store, working with a crew doing siding and decks. Every time I cut a board wrong, I think of you yelling at me for wasting good cedar. I smiled faintly. "I never yelled that much." "You did," he said, a hint of laughter in it. Then silence again, the good kind. He pulled something from his pocket, a small photo of Ethan, now maybe 2, holding a toy hammer. "He's learning early," he said. I took the photo, studied the kid's grin. "He's got her eyes," I murmured. "And your stubborn mouth," he replied. I handed the picture back. "Take care of him better than we took care of this." He nodded. "That's the plan." He stood to leave, then hesitated. "Can I bring him here someday? Just to see where it all started?" I looked at the lake, the reflection of the setting sun rippling across the surface like liquid gold. "Someday," I said. "Not today, but someday." When his car disappeared up the hill, I felt no anger, no relief, just balance. The kind that comes when the story finally folds back into itself. That night, I wrote a letter for Lily to keep with the trust papers. "When I'm gone, let the house be used for those who need to remember what honesty costs. Never sell it for convenience, never keep it for pride. It's just wood and memory, but it holds us together if we let it." I sealed it, signed the date, and placed it beside the photo of the birch tree. The years that followed didn't bring big revelations, just small, steady moments, repainting the shutters, fishing at dawn, watching storms roll across the lake. Sometimes Lily visited with her husband, sometimes alone. Once she brought Ethan, older now, full of questions. "Did my dad really sell your house?" he asked bluntly. I smiled. He tried. But he also helped build it once upon a time. The boy nodded, satisfied with that version. Maybe that's how history softens, through the simplest retelling. On my last night before turning 70, I stood on the dock again, the air thick with summer heat and the smell of pine. The lake was calm, moonlight gliding across it like memory refusing to sink. I whispered, not to anyone but the place itself. "We made it." The water answered with a ripple, gentle and endless. If you asked me what revenge looked like in the end, I'd say it looked like this. Peace that couldn't be stolen, a family learning boundaries, and a house still standing when everything else had fallen. The next morning, the air carried that kind of crisp quiet only lakes know, cool, forgiving, full of things unsaid. I sat on the porch with coffee, watching sunlight crawl over the water. It had been months since I'd seen or heard from him, and sometimes I wondered if he was still in the same town, or halfway across the country, chasing new mistakes. I didn't hate him anymore. Hate had burned itself out, leaving something smaller but steadier, an awareness. The kind that doesn't sting but also doesn't forget. That awareness became my companion, more loyal than love, more honest than grief. I spent that day repairing the roof shingles, cutting down a few low branches that had started leaning over the dock, the kind of labor that teaches patience again. The rhythm of the hammer was calming. It reminded me that some things can be fixed if you're willing to put in the time. But not people. Never people. Later, while cleaning out the attic, I found an old box I hadn't opened since his mother passed, her handwriting on the lid, faint but still graceful, for later. Inside, there were letters she'd written but never sent. One of them had his name on it. I hesitated, then unfolded it carefully. Her words were simple. One day you'll hurt your father without meaning to. When you do, don't hide. Come home. I sat there in the dust and light for a long time, the weight of that sentence pressing through decades. It wasn't anger that filled me, just the realization that she'd known both of us better than we ever knew ourselves. That night, the phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, but the voice that played back made my chest tighten. Dad, it's me. I'm near the lake. I won't come up unless you say so. I need to see it one last time. His voice cracked on last. I didn't call back. But I didn't leave either. Something told me this wasn't about ownership anymore. It was about reckoning. An hour later, headlights flickered through the trees. The crunch of tires on gravel sounded almost like memory approaching. I stepped outside, stood on the porch and watched his silhouette appear at the edge of the yard. He looked older, tired in a way that no sleep could fix. He didn't speak at first, just looked at the house like he was measuring the distance between what he took and what he lost. Finally, he said, "You fixed the dock." "Someone had to," I replied. He nodded slowly. "Looks good." We stood in silence for a long time, two men staring at something they both built and both broke. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I didn't come to apologize again. I came to give you this." He held out a small envelope, rain-speckled, soft at the edges. I took it but didn't open it. "What is it?" "The deed to my place in town," he said. "It's yours if you want it." "I don't need it anymore." I frowned. "Why would I want your house?" He shook his head. "You don't, but you might want to give it to Lily someday. She deserves something clean." We sat down on the steps, and for the first time in years he talked, not to defend himself but just to speak plainly, about how he'd hit bottom, how he'd gone to rehab twice, how Claire had left after losing everything they'd gambled on. He didn't ask for sympathy. He just laid it out like evidence, calm, factual, the way I used to teach him when explaining blueprints. "You always said to build from a solid foundation," he said. "Turns out you were talking about more than houses." I looked at him, the rain soaking through his jacket. He looked smaller somehow, but not weak, just human. "You came back," I said quietly. "That's something." He nodded, eyes on the water. "I didn't think I'd have the right to." "You didn't," I said. "But you found the courage anyway." We didn't talk about forgiveness that night. It wasn't needed. The act of being there, in the same place, breathing the same air again, was its own form of apology. He left before dawn, and when I woke, the envelope was still on the porch railing. Inside, the deed was real, signed, notarized, no tricks this time. Beneath it was a single line in his handwriting. "You taught me how to build things that last. I hope this one does." I folded it carefully, locked it in the safe beside the trust papers, and felt something I hadn't in years. Release. The kind that doesn't shout or burn, just exhales. I realized then that revenge was never about him losing the house. It was about me reclaiming myself. By summer, the house felt different, lighter, somehow more alive. Birds nested under the eaves again. The grass grew taller by the fence line. Life had moved back in where resentment used to live. Lily came to visit often, sometimes with Ethan, sometimes alone. She brought laughter, new paint colors, plans to turn the guest room into a reading nook. She'd inherited not just the trust, but the calm I'd spent a lifetime earning. One evening, she stood by the water, watching the reflection of the sky turn gold. "You ever think you'll leave this place?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, but someday it'll leave me." "That's how it's supposed to be." She smiled softly. "Then I'll keep it standing." "I know you will," I said. That night, as the last light faded, I realized something that took me a lifetime to learn. Revenge isn't about balance. It's about clarity, knowing where you end and others begin. And standing there on that dock, watching my granddaughter skip stones across the lake her father once tried to sell, I knew I'd done the one thing he couldn't. I'd kept it standing. Autumn came in slow this time, like it was afraid to interrupt. The trees around the lake turned red early, and the air began to smell of rain and cedar again. I found myself walking longer every morning, past the old birch stump, down the dirt road until it met the asphalt, then back. It wasn't exercise. It was proof that I still could. Every step reminded me that I had outlasted the noise. Lily called every few days now, her voice steadier, seasoned by the courtroom. She'd taken on a big case, environmental zoning up north, and whenever she talked about it, I could hear the same fire her grandmother had when she believed something mattered. "We're up against developers this time," she said one evening. "They're trying to drain part of the wetlands for condos." I told her, "Fight with paper first." "Paper's quieter but sharper," she laughed. "You really were born to write contracts." The next week she sent a package. Inside was a framed photo of Ethan on the dock, holding the same toy hammer his father had once used. Beneath it, in her handwriting, 3 generations, 1 lake. I hung it above the fireplace. For years that wall had felt like a memorial to what went wrong. Now it felt like a promise that something had survived. Late one night I couldn't sleep and went out to the porch. The water was black, mirror still, the moonlight cutting a path down the middle like a boundary line. I thought about all the versions of that lake I'd seen. Frozen, flooded, calm, furious. Each one honest in its own way. I wondered if people were any different. Maybe we just needed the right weather to tell the truth. Then around midnight, headlights flared across the trees. A car pulled up slowly, hesitantly. For a moment I thought it was strangers, maybe renters lost on the back roads, but when the door opened I saw him, my son. Again, but not the same. This time he didn't look like he was coming to ask for anything. He carried a small box in both hands, like something sacred. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. "I won't stay long," he said. His voice was calm, quieter than I'd ever heard it. "What's in the box?" I asked. "Tools," he said. "Ethan's outgrown them. Thought maybe they belong here." I nodded for him to come closer. He opened the box. Tiny wooden handles, a measuring tape with faded numbers, a hammer no bigger than my palm. He ran his thumb along the edge of the tape. I wanted him to know what it feels like to build something with your hands before he learns how easy it is to destroy things with words. I met his eyes. "Then you're teaching him right." We stood there looking at those small tools under the porch light. He said, "He asks about you a lot. He wants to know what kind of man his grandfather is." I thought about that for a long time. "Tell him I'm the kind who learns slow but never stops learning." He smiled faintly. "That's what I figured." He turned to leave, then hesitated. "Can I come back sometime?" "Not soon, just sometime," I said. "When you're ready to stay, not to visit." He nodded once, understanding exactly what I meant. After he drove off, I sat with that little box in my lap for a long time. The wood smelled faintly of sawdust and forgiveness. I set it by the workbench inside, right next to the old hammer I'd used when I built the dock. Side by side, they looked like 2 ends of a story finally touching. Weeks later, I took Ethan out on the water in the rowboat for the first time. Lily watched from the shore, camera in hand. The boy held the oars awkwardly, laughing when he splashed himself. "Am I doing it right, Grandpa?" He shouted. "Close enough," I said, grinning. The lake was calm, the air warm, and in that moment I felt something lift, a weight I hadn't noticed I'd been carrying. When we came back to shore, Lily hugged me. "You've got that look again," she said. "What look?" "Like you're finally done keeping score." Maybe I was. Maybe that was the truest revenge of all, not proving someone wrong, but living long enough to see the lesson pass on clean. That evening, the 3 of us sat on the porch, sharing dinner while the last light faded behind the ridge. Ethan curled up in a blanket, drifting to sleep against Lily's shoulder. The air smelled of pine and old wood smoke. I leaned back in my chair and watched the sky turn to ash and silver. Somewhere deep inside, something unclenched. I thought of the words I'd once written to her in that letter. Never sell it for convenience, never keep it for pride. Looking at them now, both of them, the daughter who'd rebuilt the trust, the grandson who'd inherit it, I realized I hadn't been guarding a house all these years. I'd been building a map back to decency. When the night grew cold, I covered Ethan with my jacket, the same one I'd worn the day I stopped the sale. The fabric smelled faintly of rain, cedar, and thyme. I whispered, "You're safe here." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. Winter returned like an old lesson I already knew by heart. The lake froze again, thick and glassy, and the air around the house turned thin enough that every sound felt carved into it. I'd always liked winters here more than summers. They stripped the place down to its bones, showed you what was still standing. This time the silence felt different, not hollow but full, like the quiet hum of something mended. Lily and Ethan came for Christmas. They brought food, laughter, and noise, that made the old floorboards come alive again. My son came too, late on Christmas Eve, after everyone had gone to bed. I found him on the porch, a thermos of coffee in his hand, watching the frozen lake under the stars. "It's strange," he said. "I used to hate this place. Now it feels like the only thing that makes sense." I sat beside him. "It's because you stopped fighting it." He nodded slowly, eyes still on the horizon. "I guess that's what you were trying to teach me all along." "No," I said quietly. "So you had to teach yourself." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small metal key. "What's this?" I asked. "My place," he said. "The one I tried to give you before. I sold it, paid off every debt. I don't own anything now, just freedom." I looked at the key in my palm, heavy and cold. "You sure about this?" "Yeah," he said. "You were right. Some things shouldn't be owned. They should just be honored." The snow began to fall, soft and slow. We didn't move. The flakes caught in his hair the same way they used to when he was a boy, running up from the dock with wet boots. For the first time since that text message years ago, there wasn't a wall between us, no contracts, no clauses, no silence too thick to cut. Just two men who had finally stopped pretending they were different kinds of broken. Morning came quiet and blue. Lily made pancakes, Ethan fed crumbs to the birds on the railing, and my son brewed another pot of coffee. The smell of cinnamon and pine filled the house. I sat back and watched them move through the kitchen, the rhythm of family rebuilt one small act at a time. Every sound, spoons clinking, laughter, doors opening, felt like the house itself exhaling after a long hold. After breakfast, I took Ethan down to the edge of the frozen lake. He wanted to try walking on it, so I held his hand and guided him a few careful steps out. "It's solid," he said, eyes wide. "It is," I said, "but even solid things can crack if you don't respect them." He nodded seriously, as if storing the sentence somewhere deep for later. I realized that's all legacy really was. Not the house, not the trust, not the paperwork. Just words that stuck. In early spring, Lily and I updated the trust one last time. We added Ethan's name under hers, 3 generations bound by ink instead of expectation. When we finished signing, she leaned back in her chair. "So this is it," she said. "The final version." I smiled. "There's no such thing as final. Only the latest revision." She laughed, and the sound echoed off the water through the open window. That summer, the birch stump finally gave up its last shoot. I planted a new sapling beside it. Ethan helped dig the hole, small hands gripping the shovel like it was sacred work. When we were done, I pressed my palm to the soil. "What's it for?" he asked. "To remind us that roots matter," I said, "even if you can't see them." As the years drifted on, the house became something else, a place people came to remember what staying looked like. Neighbors dropped by, travelers asked to rent it, and every story they left behind layered over the old ones like sediment of quiet redemption. The trust outlived all of us. It was built to one evening, much later, long after my son had moved to the coast, and Lily had taken her place as caretaker of everything we'd built. I sat by the window watching the lake burn gold beneath the setting sun. Ethan was older now, tall, calm, carrying that same stillness I'd once fought to learn. He came up behind me, resting a hand on my shoulder. "Mom says you're finally retiring," he said. "From what?" I asked. "Everything," he grinned. I chuckled. "Maybe, but I'll stay here a while longer. Someone has to make sure the water keeps its secrets." He looked out the window with me, the last of the light catching his face. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "It's honest," I corrected. And when night came, the stars stitched themselves over the lake like a ledger balanced at last. I thought back to that text message, the one that started everything, and I realized it no longer hurt to remember. The story wasn't about loss anymore. It was about what survived. The dock, the trust, the bloodline, the lesson. I whispered to the dark, to her, to the house, to whatever still listened. We kept it standing. It was the summer I turned 78 when the ache in my knees started to whisper louder than the mornings could quiet. I could still move fine, still patch a railing or sand a board, but each task stretched longer now, as if time wanted me to slow down and look at everything I had tried to outpace. The lake house no longer felt like proof of what I'd saved. It felt like a living thing that had watched me age and decided to keep me company while it did the same. The paint had faded to a soft gray. The dock boards were silver and smooth from decades of shoes and storms, and the birch I planted with Ethan had grown taller than the roofline. Every day I told myself I'd stop working on it and just sit still, but men like me never stop fixing things. We only start fixing quieter. Lily came every other weekend that year. She'd arrive early, groceries in the back seat, files spread across her passenger seat, still talking about cases before she even shut the car door. She'd check the mailbox, water the sapling, open all the windows to let the air move. Sometimes she'd bring Ethan, taller now, 17, half boy, half man, all questions. "Grandpa, why didn't you ever sell this place when it got hard?" He asked one afternoon as we patched the porch steps together. "Because selling's easy," I said. "Keeping what's right takes work." He nodded like he understood, even if he didn't yet. Later he'd come to, I knew, some lessons need decades before they sound true. My son visited too, but not often. He'd stop on his way through town, bringing supplies, never staying long enough for sunset. We spoke more easily now, though always around the edges, about fishing, the weather, old country songs. Never about the sale, never about forgiveness. It wasn't needed. Time had already done the talking for us. One evening he stood by the dock looking out at the water and said, "You know, I thought this house ruined me." I looked at him. "No," I said. "You ruined yourself. The house just refused to fall with you." He smiled a little, sad but clean, and didn't argue. When he left, he hugged me. Not a weak gesture of apology, but a strong one of understanding. That was enough. Autumn came early again. The leaves dropped faster, the air bit sharper, and the nights grew heavy with that sweet smell of burning wood. I started sorting through the drawers, old deeds, invoices, letters, and receipts that had outlived their usefulness. Every page told a version of me, the builder, the father, the fighter, the fool. I kept only one box, the one labeled Trust and Legacy. Everything else I burned in the pit by the lake, the papers curling into ash that drifted out across the water, like tiny ghosts finally set free. The firelight reflected on the surface like a heartbeat. That night, Lily found me still sitting there, the fire low, the stars mirrored in the lake. She set a blanket over my shoulders. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, watching an ember drift and vanish. "Just clearing space for the next story." She smiled. "What story's that?" "Yours," I said. "And his." She sat beside me quietly, our breaths visible in the cold. "You think he'll ever come back for good?" she asked after a while. I shook my head. "He already did. The rest is just geography. Winter hit hard that year. The snow piled deep, wind slicing through the trees, drifts swallowing the road until it felt like the world had shrunk down to the house and the lake. My hands shook sometimes when I tried to light the stove, but I didn't mind. It reminded me I was still here, still earning the quiet I'd fought for. Some nights I'd wake and hear the creaks of the house shifting in the cold and think, she's still talking to me. Then one morning in early March, I woke to a knock at the door. It was my son, carrying a thermos and 2 fishing rods. "Come on," he said, smiling. "Ice is thin, but it'll hold." We walked out together, the frost crunching under our boots. The lake stretched white and endless, a mirror of everything we'd been and lost and found again. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. The rods bent slightly under the weight of the line, the sunlight bouncing off the surface, and somewhere in the silence between us, I felt the last bit of bitterness finally melt. When we came back, Lily and Ethan were waiting with coffee and laughter. The 4 of us sat on the porch as the ice began to break into sheets that drifted toward the middle of the lake, cracking softly like glass, surrendering to warmth. It was a sound I'd heard 1,000 times. But that day it meant something different. Proof that even what's frozen can give way when the season's right. That evening, as the light faded, I stood at the edge of the dock and looked back at them, the family that had survived the storm I once thought would end us. Lily waving from the porch, Ethan running circles around her, my son packing up the gear. I felt the kind of peace that doesn't announce itself, the kind that just is. I whispered, "It's yours now, to the lake, to the house, to time itself." And for once I didn't feel like I was letting go. I felt like I was passing it forward. The following spring, the lake thawed for the last time in my lifetime. I knew it the moment I saw the way the ice broke, slowly, respectfully, like it understood I was saying goodbye. The house smelled of cedar and old memories, sunlight pouring through the same windows I'd once boarded up in anger. Every room felt lighter, like it had exhaled after years of holding its breath. I walked through it one final morning, touching the frames, the walls, the marks in the banister, where his initials still lived. I didn't fix them. Some scars deserve to stay. Lily came with Ethan and my son. They stood by the dock while I closed the shutters and locked the front door. "You sure?" she asked. "Yeah," I said softly. "So it's your turn now." She held the keys in her palm, the metal warm from the sun. My son placed a hand on my shoulder. We didn't say anything. There was nothing left that needed words. Before leaving, I took one last walk down the dock. The water was calm, a perfect mirror, holding the reflection of the birch we planted all those years ago. It had grown tall, strong, unshaken by storms. I reached out and touched the railing, feeling the grooves worn by decades of hands, mine most of all. "You kept standing," I whispered. Maybe I was talking to the house, maybe to myself. When I turned back, they were waiting by the car, silhouettes against the morning light. I realized this was what real revenge looked like. Not bitterness, not triumph, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd broken the pattern. I hadn't raised another man who destroyed. I'd raised one who rebuilt. And that, after everything, was enough. As we drove away, the lake disappeared in the rearview mirror, shrinking until it was just a shimmer between the trees. But I knew it would still be there, watching, remembering, forgiving. So now, if you're hearing my story, sitting somewhere far from this place, I want to ask you one thing. Where are you watching from tonight?